if you listen to the propaganda, it's all over for traditional churches. The problem for the propagandist is that the argument they make is usually irrational and illogical, and that should alert traditional Christians to take a little bit more sober view of the future. Hi, I'm Warren, parish priest here at St. Columba's. Glad you could join me for my message of the day. We're living in a period of intense self-criticism and the criticism of others. And it's washed into how many traditional Christians and traditional churches might see themselves. Sort of a despondency at the decline that we've experienced over the last, say, 50 years. It's not uncommon to hear someone say that traditional Anglican churches here in Adelaide, for instance, will disappear. There won't be any left. Or that we're all going to be in house churches in X number of decades, or something like that. And in addition to that, people then might say that, and you sort of get a sense that they in some way blame themselves, as though they somehow could have held the tide of the cultural change that's accelerating, but it's been going on for a long time, against traditional Christianity in the West. Of course, it's just not true. Could we do something about it? Of course, but we can't change a cultural tide at this particular moment. In addition to all of this, if you become familiar with all the material that's lots and lots and lots and lots of material is produced by the churches to try and help churches to have a future, to really get hold of what the task is, the mission, how we should organise ourselves, manage ourselves, how we get out into the world, all these kinds of things. And the problem is that a lot of it isn't actually particularly appropriate to traditional churches. It's not particularly sensitive to either our problems or our gifts. That's a problem also. And in all of this, and of course, the reason why I said that the idea that traditional churches don't have a future, and why I said it's irrational and illogical, is because you can't judge the future just on the past, because it doesn't include, that judgment doesn't include human innovation. Human innovation in all fields is something that can't be quantified or guessed. And of course, in 50 years' time, maybe there will be no traditional churches, Anglican churches left in Adelaide. I doubt it, and I say that. I'm going to talk about God at the end here, but I'm going to talk about human innovation. Because of human innovation, I think we do have a future. That's because we don't have to reproduce the past. So, for instance, we know a lot of what has happened, what a lot of the problems are. So we can start tinkering with our practices, our resources. We can show nimble leadership, and we can have congregations wise enough to support the endeavours that we need to do. And we can do things like fireproofing our future. It's clear, I think we could take a guess to say that things aren't going to get particularly easier for traditional churches, for Christianity generally in the West, and it's not going to get particularly easier for traditional churches, particularly suburban ones. So part of the task will be to fireproof our future, and part of that is to be honest about our structural weaknesses. So, as an example, smaller congregations in the future, compared to say 50 years ago, will mean that when expensive items come up, like fixing your roof, like at St. Columba's here, it's a big roof at a very acute angle, then small congregations are going to struggle to pay for that. What do we do about that? We should be looking at that now, and that might be 30 years away, but we should be fireproofing for that, without in any way compromising what we have to do now. nimble leadership is required, wisdom from congregations, and of course the kind of commitment that traditional churches are known for from their leaders and all congregation members. Now, the reason that I haven't mentioned God, and I've talked more about human innovation, is because the two aren't mutually exclusive. It's sort of like the old joke about, the man there's a flood and he's on top of the roof of his house and the flood waters are rising and rising and rising, and the plank of wood comes past, the boat comes past, and each time something comes past he says, "Oh no, God's going to save me, God's going to save me, I have faith in God." And then, the helicopter comes past, jump on, no. Anyway, he dies, gets to heaven and says to God, "Oh, where were you?" And God says, "Look, I sent the helicopter, the boat, the etc., etc." That's what I think about our task as a church. We can talk about human innovation. That doesn't exclude God, because we're going to find it. God's at the source of our human innovation. Thanks for joining me. Bye-bye.